Ivana's breakup with Donald Trump caused a sensation, playing out on the front pages of America's newspapers, most famously the New York Post. For weeks, readers were treated to headlines like "Split, Trouble in Paradise" as Donald Trump walks out on Ivana. And Ivana gets even. Trump was labeled Don Juan, with stories about secret visits to see a then unknown model named Marla Maples. And perhaps the most famous of all, Marla's supposed boast, "Best sex I've ever had." Ivana famously told Barbara Walters of an encounter she had with Marla on the ski slopes in Aspen.
She said, "I'm Marla, and I love your husband. Do you?"
Yes.
What did you say?
Get lost. I love my husband very much.
Nina Burley is the author of The Trump Women, Part of the Deal.
The public face of the marriage exploded after that interaction between Marla Maples and Ivana Trump.
Ivana's divorce from Donald Trump was finalized in 1992.
What's happening, people? Welcome to Dr. John Podcast again. Trump's alleged efforts to wipe surveillance tape at Mar-a-Lago point directly to obstruction, as he knew exactly what the camera saw. That instinct to make evidence disappear forms the core of one of the most explosive allegations in the classified documents case. Let me walk you through something that will absolutely blow your mind. According to the federal indictment filed by special counsel Jack Smith, after the government issued a legal subpoena demanding surveillance footage from Mar-a-Lago, Trump allegedly directed his staff to have the entire security camera server deleted. And here's the part that makes this absolutely staggering. The specific purpose of that deletion attempt was to prevent that footage from ever reaching a federal grand jury. Those aren't my words. Those are the exact words from the indictment itself. Not to fix some random technical issue, not to free up storage space on the server, not for any innocent reason whatsoever, to prevent it from reaching the people who were legally entitled to see it.
And Marla Maples walked down the aisle with Trump in 1993 in the society wedding of the year. But that marriage would also end in divorce after 6 years. Melania Knaus, a model originally from Slovenia, became Trump's third wife in 2005. She and Ivana got on well enough. They posed for photos with each other numerous times.
Melania wasn't the woman that broke up the marriage. So I don't think that she had any reason to resent her in the same way that she had a second wife.
Ivana was always famous for her glamour. Even in the kitchen, she looked like a movie star. In 1991, she made goulash for Inside Edition.
Looks great, doesn't it? Look at that.
But despite her amicable relationship with Donald Trump, she told Jay Leno in 1995 that the divorce had taken its toll.
It does take time, and it took me about 2 years to even think about another man.
Are you kidding me? This is absolutely wild. And today, I want to take you through every single detail of what the indictment says actually happened. I want to introduce you to the people who were allegedly involved, break down exactly why this specific allegation is so devastating, and show you why this isn't just about one man or one property in Florida. This cuts to the very heart of something much bigger, something that has been building for years, something that legal scholars and watchdog groups have been warning about since the very beginning. So buckle up, because this story goes deeper than you might realize. Here's the setup, and understanding the sequence of events is absolutely critical to grasping why the obstruction allegation carries so much weight. The federal government first became aware that classified materials were being improperly stored at Mar-a-Lago and began the process of trying to recover them. The National Archives initiated the initial contact, then the Department of Justice escalated the matter.
Donald and Ivana Trump were New York's self-made royal couple, the glittering duo everyone admired. Yet beneath the glitz, trouble was brewing, and their marriage eventually came crashing down like an avalanche. It all began like a fairy tale, though. Donald met Ivana, née Ivana Zelničková, in 1976. She was living in Montreal, working as a model and ski instructor after immigrating from Czechoslovakia.
Fantastic years. I was born and raised in Czechoslovakia. I went through training as a skier through the sports.
She ended up in New York City for a modeling gig, and during a dinner with other models, Donald swooped in. He secured the group the best table in the place and joined them. Smooth move, right?
And I turned to my girlfriend and said, I have a good news and bad news. What is the good news? We're going to get a table real fast. What is the bad news? This fellow behind me is going to go and sit with us.
Ivana wrote in her memoir, Raising Trump.
And eventually, in June 2022, FBI agents showed up at the Florida club to personally assess the storage situation. And during that visit, something caught their attention. There was a security camera positioned directly outside a storage room where boxes upon boxes of sensitive materials had been kept. This wasn't just any camera. This was a camera capturing every single person who went in and out of that room, every box that was moved, every moment that could potentially contradict any claims about what had been happening with those classified documents. And then the government issued a subpoena for that footage, a formal, legally binding demand for all recordings captured by that camera. And according to the superseding indictment that Jack Smith filed, within just weeks of that subpoena being issued, Trump had his aides approaching the club's IT director with a specific request.
We made polite small talk. No funny stuff at all. He sensed correctly that flirting would not work with me and acted like a gentleman. Imagine that. Donald Trump. A perfect gentleman. Who would have thought?
I think it's fantastic.
Ivana wasn't looking for love. She was casually seeing someone in Montreal. But Donald had other plans. He sent her 100 roses, took her out to fancy dinners, and called her every other day for 3 months. Persistence paid off. By Christmas, Donald asked her to go on vacation. They went to Aspen and had the most romantic time together. On New Year's Eve, Donald told her, "If you don't marry me, you'll ruin your life." Now that's the Trump we know. And despite having known each other for only a few months, Ivana agreed to marry him.
Donald always had a great head on his shoulder, and I saw the potential there.
They tied the knot on April 9th, 1977 in New York City, and during their honeymoon in Mexico, Ivana became pregnant with their first child. On December 31, 1977, their son Donald Jr. was born. The couple went on to welcome 2 more children.
They wanted the server deleted. They wanted that footage gone. They wanted the entire digital record of what that camera had seen to simply cease to exist. Come on, think about what that means. The government asks for the footage, and the response is to figure out how to make that footage disappear into thin air. That's not the behavior of someone who has nothing to hide. That's the behavior of someone who knows exactly what's on that tape and knows exactly how damaging it would be if anyone else saw it. And here's where I need to explain something about how obstruction law actually works, because there's been a lot of public confusion about this, and some of that confusion has been deliberately stoked by people who want you to believe that because the footage wasn't ultimately destroyed, no crime was committed. That is absolutely not how federal obstruction law works.
Ivanka in 1981 and Eric in 1984. A picture-perfect marriage, right? But wait.
He did not know how to speak to them in the children way of thinking. So he was able to speak to them only when they came from university, when eventually he was able to speak business with them. But otherwise he really did not know how to handle the kids.
Donald and Ivana weren't just partners in marriage, but also in business. Donald appointed Ivana as the vice president of interior design at his recently acquired Commodore Hotel, which was being converted into the Grand Hyatt Hotel.
We get along very well, and there's not a lot of disagreement because ultimately Ivana does exactly as I tell her to do.
Ivana continued to help Donald build his real estate empire, assisting with the construction of Trump Tower and the Trump Taj Mahal Casino in Atlantic City.
And I was chief executive officer, and casino really did very well. It was the most profitable hotel casino in the United States.
She later became president of the Plaza Hotel. However, their seemingly perfect marriage hit the rocks in 1989 when Ivana discovered Donald's affair with model Marla Maples.
And I want to make this crystal clear because it's crucial for understanding why this allegation carries such serious legal weight. Trump's lawyer went on television and made the argument that no tapes were deleted, and if Trump had really wanted to destroy the evidence, he could have just done it. Therefore, she argued, the fact that the footage still exists and was eventually turned over proves that he never actually intended to get rid of it. Yeah, right. That's not how the law works. In federal obstruction cases, you don't have to succeed at destroying evidence to be guilty. The attempt itself is what matters. If you are subject to a legal subpoena, a formal demand for specific evidence that you are legally required to produce, and you direct someone to destroy that evidence in response to that subpoena, you have committed obstruction of justice. Full stop. There is no exemption for failed attempts. There is no loophole that says it's only a crime if you actually manage to destroy the evidence. The crime is in the trying, not in the achieving. And what the indictment specifically alleges is that Trump directed his aides to approach the IT director. Those aides went to the IT worker and communicated that the boss wanted the server deleted. They wanted it gone. They wanted no trace left behind. And the IT worker, this single individual who stood up and said no, reportedly responded that he didn't know how to delete the server and didn't think he had the right to do it anyway. He pushed back. He refused to comply. And by doing so, he didn't just preserve the footage. He preserved a paper trail documenting that the entire attempt had been made. He is essentially the reason the evidence of the obstruction attempt exists in the first place. He is the person who said no when it would have been so easy to just go along with what he was being told. This is absolutely wild. And today we're going through the full story from beginning to end. The Mar-a-Lago security footage, the subpoena, the alleged deletion attempt, the IT worker who refused to cooperate, and the broader pattern of how Trump has treated records and evidence throughout his entire political career. Because here's the thing that so many people don't fully grasp. This didn't start with Mar-a-Lago. This didn't start with a security camera in Florida. This is a pattern that has been building for years. And understanding that full pattern is what makes the security footage allegation land as the serious and specific thing it actually is. Let's get into it. Let's dive into the specific details of what the indictment actually says happened. I think a lot of people have a general awareness that there's a classified documents case and a security camera and some kind of obstruction allegation, but they don't know the specific sequence of events and the specific people involved. So let's lay it out with absolute clarity. We need to start from the very beginning of the timeline because the Mar-a-Lago classified document situation didn't start as an obstruction story. It started as a record story. When Trump left the White House in January 2021, he took a significant quantity of documents to Mar-a-Lago, boxes upon boxes of materials, including documents bearing classification markings. These weren't just personal papers or random mementos. These were government records that by law should have been transferred to the National Archives. The National Archives, which is responsible for preserving presidential records, became aware that materials were missing and reached out to try to get them back. After prolonged back and forth, 15 boxes were eventually returned to the archives in January 2022. And when the archives looked through what was in those boxes, they found materials with classification markings. That discovery triggered a referral to the Justice Department. From there, the DOJ launched an investigation, and in June 2022, FBI agents visited Mar-a-Lago in connection with that investigation. They looked at the storage situation, and they noticed a security camera. The camera was positioned outside the storage room where boxes had been kept, and prosecutors subsequently issued a subpoena for the footage captured by that camera. A legal demand formally issued, making the footage subject to federal evidence requirements. And the indictment alleges that within weeks of that subpoena, the process of trying to make the footage disappear began. Now let's talk about the specific people involved in the alleged obstruction. This is important because this is not an allegation that Trump personally went and physically tampered with a hard drive. The allegation is that he directed other people to do it. And those other people are named in the indictment as co-defendants. Trump's personal aide, who traveled with him and assisted him at Mar-a-Lago, was already charged in the original indictment for his role in moving boxes of classified materials in and out of the storage room in patterns that prosecutors say were designed to hide documents from investigators. In the superseding indictment, the property manager at Mar-a-Lago was added as a defendant on the obstruction charge related to the footage. According to the indictment, this property manager approached the club's IT director and told him that the boss wanted the server deleted. The boss wanted the server deleted. He asked the IT director how long the footage was stored and kept. The IT director reportedly responded that he didn't know how to delete it and that he didn't believe he had the right to do that. He pushed back. He refused to comply, and by doing so, he preserved not just the footage itself, but a paper and testimonial trail documenting that the attempt had been made. Can you believe this? The person who actually stopped the evidence from being destroyed was not a prosecutor or an FBI agent. It was the IT worker at Mar-a-Lago who looked at what he was being asked to do, understood it was wrong, and said no. And that refusal is now documented in a federal indictment as part of the evidence of the obstruction attempt. Now let's talk about what the footage actually showed and why it was so important to the government's case. Because the security camera was not there by accident, and it was not capturing irrelevant or incidental content. The indictment describes a series of movements of boxes in and out of the storage room. in the period after the government had issued subpoenas for documents, and before Trump's team ultimately produced a certified statement claiming that all classified documents had been returned and that the storage area had been fully searched. Boxes going in, boxes coming out, being moved around, being relocated. During the exact period when the government was trying to get all of the classified materials back, and Trump's lawyers were making representations to the government about the status of that process. Prosecutors say that pattern of box movement captured on the surveillance footage during that critical window is itself evidence of efforts to move or conceal classified materials from investigators who had already served legal process for their return. So the security camera was simultaneously evidence of the underlying classified document situation and evidence of what was happening around that situation during the retrieval process. That is presumably exactly why the indictment alleges the instruction was given to delete the server, because getting rid of the footage would eliminate both layers of what it documented. The movements of boxes during the period when representations were being made, that everything was accounted for, and the fact that those movements happened at all in ways that complicated or contradicted those representations. Yeah, that is the strategic logic of an evidence deletion attempt when you understand what you are looking at. And prosecutors argue that the deletion attempt itself is the most powerful possible evidence that whoever gave the instruction understood what the footage showed and understood that a federal grand jury seeing it would be a serious problem. Can you believe this? Because innocent people do not try to delete tapes. People who know what the tapes show are the ones who try to make the tapes disappear. Now let's talk about the broader pattern of how Trump has handled evidence and records throughout his political career. Because the Mar-a-Lago security footage obstruction allegation is the most legally specific and the most directly charged, but it is part of a pattern that goes back years. A pattern that watchdog groups and legal scholars have been documenting since the very beginning. White House staff during Trump's first term reported that he regularly tore up documents after reading them, including documents that were required by law to be preserved as presidential records. Staff would sometimes literally tape the pieces back together afterward, because the Presidential Records Act requires that those documents be maintained. There were also reports of him attempting to flush certain notes and records in the White House. These are not allegations that were manufactured after the fact. They were reported contemporaneously by people who were in the building and watched it happen with their own eyes. And after he left the White House, he took 15 boxes of records to Mar-a-Lago, including materials bearing classification markings, which set off the entire chain of events that led to the criminal investigation, the indictment, and the security footage allegation. A watchdog organization that tracks government records issues noted at the time that Trump's handling of presidential documents might have already violated federal statutes that criminalized destroying or mutilating government property and records. And here's something that really makes you think. In a completely separate legal context, a federal judge in Minnesota issued an order specifically blocking the Trump administration from destroying or altering evidence in a case involving the fatal shooting of a protester by federal officers. The judge was concerned enough about evidence preservation that he felt it necessary to explicitly order it. Come on, when courts start proactively ordering you not to destroy evidence before you have even been accused of doing it, that tells you something about the established pattern of behavior that multiple institutions have been observing and documenting. So let's bring this all together now. After going through the full sequence of the Mar-a-Lago security footage situation, the specific people involved, what the footage showed, and the broader pattern of how Trump has handled evidence across his political career, I want to land on what all of it really means. The attempt to delete the footage is legally significant on its own, regardless of whether the deletion succeeded. And this is the point I most want to make sure lands clearly, because I think the no tapes were deleted defense is going to resonate with people who don't understand how obstruction law actually works. So let me be very direct about this. In federal law, obstruction of justice does not require that the obstructive act succeeded. The crime is the attempt. If you are under a subpoena, meaning a legal demand for evidence that you are required to comply with, and you direct someone to destroy that evidence, you have committed obstruction. Period. It does not matter if the person you directed refuses to comply. It does not matter if the evidence survives. What matters is that you knew about the subpoena, you knew what the evidence was, and you directed someone to get rid of it specifically to prevent it from reaching the grand jury that was legally entitled to see it. Those are the elements of the crime. And what the indictment alleges is that every single one of those elements was present. Trump knew about the subpoena for the footage. He knew what the cameras had captured. He directed aides to approach the IT director. Those aides told the IT director that the boss wanted the server deleted. The instruction was given. The attempt was made. The only reason the footage survives is that the IT worker said no, and then the whole sequence was documented in ways that found their way into the indictment. Are you kidding me? That is obstruction. Successful obstruction would have been worse, but unsuccessful obstruction is still a crime. And the defense that nothing was actually deleted is legally irrelevant to the question of whether the attempt to delete it constituted a federal crime. The security footage is the most powerful evidence in the entire classified documents case precisely because it shows rather than tells. And here is why that very specific distinction matters so much legally and politically. A lot of the classified documents case involves documentary evidence about what was in the boxes, testimony from people about conversations and events they witnessed, and legal arguments about what the obligations of a president regarding classified materials actually are. Those are the kinds of arguments that get complicated and contested very quickly in legal proceedings where both sides have skilled lawyers making competing arguments about facts and about what the law requires. But security footage of boxes being moved in and out of a storage room during the exact period when a subpoena for those boxes is pending, and when Trump's lawyers are telling the government that everything has been returned, that is not complicated. It does not require a legal expert to interpret. It does not require someone to understand the Espionage Act or the Presidential Records Act or the specific classification handling requirements for the relevant document types. A jury can watch that footage and understand what it shows without needing a law degree or any specialized knowledge. It is visual. It is concrete. It shows boxes moving at specific times in a specific location during a specific period with specific legal significance. And that is precisely why the allegation that Trump tried to have it deleted is so significant beyond just the obstruction charge itself. Because if the footage is the simplest and most visually compelling piece of evidence in the case, then the attempt to erase it is the clearest possible demonstration that someone in the chain of events understood exactly how damaging that simple and visual evidence was. Come on, you only try to delete the tape if you know what the tape shows, and you know what showing it to a grand jury is going to mean for you. And if you know all of that and you still try to delete it rather than comply with the subpoena, you have just given prosecutors something that is in many ways more valuable than the footage itself. You have given them evidence of consciousness of guilt. Documented evidence that the people involved in the situation understood that what was on that tape was incriminating and made a deliberate choice to try to make it disappear rather than let investigators see it. This is wild because the deletion attempt may end up being more damaging to the overall case narrative than the underlying footage would have been on its own. The footage shows boxes moving. The deletion attempt shows that someone knew exactly why those movements were a problem and what the consequences of the grand jury seeing them would be. The broader pattern of how Trump has treated evidence and records throughout his career matters enormously for understanding what the Mar-a-Lago situation represents in full context. Because this is not a one-off incident involving one set of classified documents and one security camera at one club in Florida. This is the most serious and the most legally specific expression of a pattern that goes back years. A pattern that watchdog groups, White House staff, journalists, and now federal prosecutors have been documenting across the entire arc of his time in political life. White House staff during Trump's first term reported that he regularly tore up documents after reading them, including documents that were required by law to be preserved as presidential records. Staff sometimes literally reassembled those torn documents afterward because the Presidential Records Act is a federal law that requires those records to be maintained and eventually transferred to the National Archives. There were also reports reported at the time by people who were present that Trump attempted to flush certain notes and records in the White House. After he left the White House, he took 15 boxes of records to Mar-a-Lago rather than transferring them to the archives as the law requires, including materials bearing classification markings. Watchdog organizations noted at the time that his pattern of document handling might already have violated federal statutes that specifically criminalize the destruction or mutilation of government property and federal records. And in a completely separate legal context involving a protest shooting case in Minnesota, a federal judge issued an order specifically and proactively blocking the Trump administration from destroying or altering evidence. Not because they had already been accused of evidence destruction in that case, but because the judge considered it necessary to explicitly order evidence preservation before evidence was destroyed. Yeah, when courts start proactively ordering you not to destroy evidence before you have even been accused of it in a specific proceeding, that is a documented institutional signal about the established pattern of behavior that multiple institutions have been watching and responding to. The Mar-a-Lago security footage obstruction allegation is where that pattern reaches its most legally extreme expression, not just failing to preserve records, not just taking materials that should have stayed in federal custody, but allegedly directing other people to actively destroy specific evidence, specifically in response to a specific federal subpoena, specifically to prevent a federal grand jury from seeing it. Are you kidding me? That is the end point of a pattern that began with tearing up documents in the Oval Office and never encountered consequences serious enough to change the behavior. And the question of whether it will encounter those consequences, now given that the underlying case has been dismissed on procedural grounds while the underlying allegations and evidence remain on the public record, is one that legal scholars and accountability advocates are going to be debating for a long time. And here is where I want to leave you today, because a security footage story is ultimately a story about what happens to the relationship between power and accountability when someone in a position of power treats evidence as a personal problem to be managed and destroyed rather than as a public record that belongs to the people. The cameras were recording. The government issued a subpoena. The instruction to delete the server went out. The IT worker said no, and that refusal preserved the trail. The all-seeing cameras at Mar-a-Lago became the government's witnesses the moment the subpoena was issued. And the alleged attempt to erase them became paradoxically some of the most compelling evidence of what the administration wanted to hide. The case has been dismissed for now on procedural grounds, but the allegations, the documented sequence of events, the conversations, the text messages, the account of the IT worker who pushed back and said no, all of it is on the permanent public record. And it will be part of the historical account of this period for as long as anyone wants to understand what actually happened at Mar-a-Lago and what was allegedly done to try to keep it from being seen. Stay tuned, because next time we are going inside the specific classified documents themselves. What was in those boxes? How sensitive the materials actually were? And what prosecutors said the specific contents tell us about the national security stakes of keeping them at a private membership club in Palm Beach, Florida. That conversation is going to matter.